Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm Vivian from IFAD, the International Fund for Agricultural Development. And I am going to provide an overview of the Agroecological Transition Program that is managed by IFAD and financed by the European Commission. And today I have the privilege to moderate part of this session. And as we all know, agroecology is gaining momentum more and more to address the number of issues that traditional industrial agriculture, and all the limitations, we are all aware of that. And as you know, like agroecology is one of the solutions for this problem, and require a sort of systemic change. And unfortunately, systemic transformations don't tend not to happen on their own. And that's why the TPP exists, and that's why also the Agroecological Transition Program is here to support and provide answers to the number of questions that we all try to address. And the goal of the program is to catalyze the transition toward more equitable, resilient, and environmentally sustainable food system. And this is done through, innovative technologies, practices, and evidence-based tools and recommendation. So in this session, we will hear from the principal investigators of the 3 CGR projects that are part of this program. And we will hear how the 3 projects act on catalyzer on change, like acting on specific leverage. And these are starting from ICRAF with its metrics to holistically assess agroecology and guide outcome-based policy and investment, but also CIET with its inclusive digital tool to provide technical support and performance assessments for practitioners. And lastly, Biodiversity with its incentives and investment to support innovative pathway and traceable private-public sector models for agroecology. Now, before calling the principal investigator here on the stage, I would like to take you through a journey across some of the most emblematic keywords used by these 3 projects. And I'm going to start with one of my favorite, that is removing roadblocks. This refers to the hindering factors that prevent the change we need to embrace agroecology. For the metrics project of ICRAF, I selected 2 keywords that are going beyond measures of productivity and creating a level playing field, where multiple dimensions are incorporated into performance metrics that complement the usual measures of profitability, with environmental and social indicators, that's also factoring in externalities, for example. For the inclusive digital tools of CIET, we run across another keyword that is, co-creation. And this has been mentioned a number of times today. Because it's a cornerstone of agroecology, according to which community involvement is a precondition for grassroots-driven movements. And in this project, participatory approaches meet digital solutions to drive the change via extension services that serve farmers and provide evidence to influence local decision makers. The last one, the private sector investment and incentive and investment project of Biodiversity. We have another intriguing keyword that is blockchain-powered traceability and business cases and business models. That once again is very popular. We are just in it in the project was just presented, and I really hope we will manage to build more synergies with this. And these are to leverage on the crucial role the private sector is playing, and the opportunities to leverage more incentives. To leverage more investments in the transformation and transition process. So now I would like to call the principal investigators. And we are going to enter into the second part of the session. Would you like to sit or to stand?
Thank you, Vivian. I think we'll do a quick presentation. You have slides.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so
ready,
now sorry. We have the presentations of the 3 projects. We are going to start with Matthias Gack, who is the principal investigator of metrics, and we have 10 minutes per project. So yeah, let's try to stick to that.
Thank you so much, Vivian.
Thank you, Vivian, and thanks for the reminder for the 10 minutes. Good afternoon, everyone. Come on, you can do better. Good afternoon, everyone. That sounds a lot better. Thank you very much. So I've got the pleasure to introduce you and reflect upon the metrics project as part of the transitions program. I'll try to not go into too much detail, so we'll actually have time for the panel discussion. If we could go to the next slide, please. Oh, here we go. Wonderful. So in principle, it sounds a bit dull, boring to talk about metrics, indicators. But in the end, personally, I believe what we measure to a large degree determines what we do. It's the foundation for change in many ways. If I would ask most of you, what matters in life? You would probably say something like having a meaning, good health, love. But how do we measure success in our society? We often look at financial aspects, at career, etc. And to some degrees in agri-food systems, I think it's quite similar. We all know agri-food systems are highly multifunctional. They contribute so many different values, some of them material, some of them not, to current and future generations. But when we look at success measures, very often they're very limited, and there's a certain bias towards economic and profitability, productivity. Of course, agri-food systems need to be productive, they need to be profitable. But we also need to take into account that agri-food systems produce a lot more. And agroecology as a concept is designed to address all of these dimensions of performance. However, if performance is measured in most cases in a rather limited set, then we're not having that level playing field. And in order to upscale agroecological transitions, as Vivian so nicely introduced, we need to create this level playing field where different approaches to agri-food system sustainability are measured in an equal manner, where all of its dimensions are taken into account. So I won't go into too much detail here, don't worry about it. We were all asked to reflect upon to which degree we integrate agroecological principles in these TPP projects. In this case, we're not trying to measure agroecological transitions. We're trying to create metrics frameworks that are creating that level playing field. So too much of an agroecological bias would be counterproductive. This notwithstanding, in the very first step that we did in this project, the review of existing approaches, frameworks, and tools for measuring agri-food system performance, we did look at to which degree these are aligned with agroecological principles, but we're not using these as a determinative factor in terms of selecting metrics. What we emphasize a lot is the principle of co-creation of knowledge. That is at the very center of what we're doing. This whole component 2, testing and evaluation of metrics, that's all about co-creation, co-learning, co-design. So the metrics project works on a global level, but with a particular emphasis in 8 countries. I'm not going to go through all of them. You can see them at the top. The idea is to start with reviewing, but throughout the process, engaging stakeholders, then designing novel ways of measuring agri-food system performance, testing these new approaches, and above all, getting diverse stakeholders to use it. Because we're not going to be transformative if we're just staying in our research bubble. We can produce the best knowledge products in the world. If they're not useful for people, we're not going to make change happen. So for us, engaging with a diversity of actors from diverse backgrounds on diverse scales is of absolute crucial importance. So we're currently somewhere in the middle. We're starting the testing increasingly, and within a few months, I think we're getting closer towards this global policy engagement, investment engagement, to really get people to change their behavior in terms of understanding why it is important to measure agri-food system performance holistically. So we, as said, set out reviewing thousands of metrics. And what did we notice? There's certainly no shortage of indicators, metrics, frameworks, tools. They're all over the place, and there's more and more coming up. So instead of designing yet a new tool with rigid indicators telling you should be measuring this, this, and this, we've taken a different approach to nudge people towards true holistic assessment of agri-food system performance. In our view, being holistic doesn't just mean you take into account different dimensions of performance of sustainability. So to make sure that there's some aspects of environmental, social, and economic performance integrated, it's also important to integrate different perspectives. It is very important to take a systems lens and integrate aspects that only appear on a systems level, like resilience, for instance. And it is very important to think about the trade-offs and synergies between different dimensions of performance. So we've developed, rather than a rigid framework, we've developed a meta framework that really should help a diversity of highly different stakeholders on different scales with different needs and different contexts to measure what matters to them, while nudging them a bit towards being more holistic, more inclusive, more participatory in their approaches. So this meta framework does not tell you these are the right indicators for you. It gives you a principles-based and steps-based approach to selecting the right metrics in your case. And for doing so, our massive review is very helpful, and I'll get to the database component that is very helpful in this regard in a minute. But it also helps you in asking the right question on not just what to measure, but also how to measure, whom to engage in the measurement process, for whom these information should be valuable, and how to turn data into valuable information that can really result in change. And as I've said, there's a strong component of engagement. Thank you very much, Lisa and Beatrice, for all the great work done so far, and Sandhya for taking it up now, because we not only want to co-learn, co-design along the process. For us, it's really of crucial importance that people adopt our proposal that is contextualized, but that has a line of thinking in it, basically. And for that, we think it's really important that there's ownership and participation along the way. And then we really integrate these diverse perspectives. So from the first series of key informant interviews from different countries, different stakeholder groups, etc., we've distilled a series of key gaps that people identified in terms of what is available to them at the moment, what they're measuring at the moment in our meta framework. And in subsequent engagements, we're trying to fill these gaps step by step. And we've also distilled 3 key different use cases. They're not for these metrics, basically. They're not so much clustered by geographies or by different stakeholders, private sector, multilaterals, donors, civil society, farm organizations, but much more on whether people are interested in measuring performance in a single project, in a MEL plan, for instance, on a portfolio level or on a true systems level. And now I'm coming to a point that I think for many of you is very interesting. Based on this extensive review, our wonderful partner, Statistics for Sustainable Development, thanks a lot, Dave, is currently preparing a draft database that will be publicly accessible and further co-designed together with potential users to reduce the amount of time that people spent on actually selecting metrics, and thereby hopefully creating more space for more multi-stakeholder inclusive processes for doing so. And in this co-design and application phase, I think being part of a platform like the Agroecology TPP is crucial. Here we've got multilaterals, we've got donors, we've got researchers, we've got civil society organizations, farm organizations, little but a few private sector entities, and this makes a connection for engaging with people and then getting people to adopt our knowledge products and co-design them with us much easier. But in addition to that, the TPP doesn't consist of individual projects. It's structured in domains, and the metrics domain of the Agroecology TPP consists of more than just the transitions metrics project, but also, as you've heard before, from work package 2 of the CGR initiative with the Holpa tool, for instance, then a wonderful collaboration with FAO, Hi Remy, CIRAD, and Stats for SD once again, and of course GIZ as the donor on applying TAPE, building a new platform for data management of the FAO tool for agroecological performance evaluation, and coming up with a holistic data set throughout 4 countries of the performance of agroecology. And just started last week the collaboration with IDRC, ICADA and others on scoping what else is needed to measure agroecological transitions and their performance. So I hope all of you also see this value of being part of such a platform to make more of a single project. With this, thank you very much. I would like to thank all of these people and many, many more. And I hope this list gets a lot longer by the end of the project. Over to you, Lenny.
Okay, hi everybody. My name is Leni Wallenberg and I'm from the Alliance of Biodiversity and CIAT. And now we move from metrics as where you want to go to digital tools as one of the drivers of agroecological transitions. So the digital scaling challenge is that with digital tools, we have this incredible, powerful tool to share information widely. But the information that we share is often populated by people like me, in other words, scientists or government or even NGOs, and it's quite top down. It's not really driven by farmers and the communities. So co-creation is one opportunity. Co-creation of the content of a digital tool is one opportunity to improve the context relevant of these digital tools, to improve how we merge different knowledge systems, and how to improve farmers' voice. So the project that I'm presenting is one of these 3 transitions projects. We call it Inclusive Digital Tools. And the purpose is first to improve the inclusiveness of smallholders. Second is to improve the agroecological and climate-related content in digital tools. And finally, the part that I'm going to talk most about today is to test innovations for co-creation. We're working in 2 different countries and regions in those countries. We're working in Pará State in Brazil on livestock together with Solidariedade, an NGO, and in Vietnam on rice with IRI, the International Rice Research Institute. And we chose these 2 places as hotspots of both emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, as well as sustainability for those respective subsectors. We started the work by doing a review of the available tools, focusing on performance assessment tools and technical advisory tools. And we reviewed, even though it says 61 here, we actually reviewed a couple of hundred. Actually, we reviewed every single thing we could find on the web and through interviews. And we identified about 230 different tools. Of those, 61 were technical assistance and performance tools. And of those, we found some element of agroecology in them. And when I say some element, if you remember the principles, the primary elements that we found were things like productivity. We did find co-creation, interestingly, highly ranking, but input, efficiency, and so on. And so when I say that 65% of the tools had some element of agroecology, they were the lower ranking agroecology types of indicators, the ones that you would tend to find everywhere. We only found 3 tools, or 5%, that included that were complete, in our view, of all the agroecological principles that we used. We didn't have Matthias's framework yet. So what do we mean by co-creation in a digital tool, right? It has very different meanings depending on the context. And we did a review of digital inclusion. We tried to find co-creation in the inclusion literature. And it was actually interesting that co-creation is a gap in the digital tool literature. But we tried to apply the agroecology concept of co-creation, and we think of it in 4 ways. So first is context relevance. Second is merging knowledge systems. Third is supporting collaborative solutions with farmers. And the last is a little bit strange, but it's trying to recognize that farmers' time costs money, or is a resource. And so can we use that efficiently? So on to Brazil. We did baseline studies in both of our countries to try to understand what would be the kind of platforms for co-creation. And I think we're finding this pretty much everywhere where we go. Many of the farmers have smartphones. They're using WhatsApp as one of their primary platforms. Social media is one of the most popular ways for them to interact with each other and others. And particularly with extension agents, they're interacting via WhatsApp. And so this is an opportunity. How can we mimic social media platforms for farmers to exchange information? So working with Solidaridad, they already had a farm management tool called Extension Solutions, and they built an interface for farmers called Solis, which they're now testing, that would allow this kind of social media interaction. So the landing page is basically, it doesn't require registration or download. It's just a link that they receive. From that link, they can then access an individual action plan and their advisor contact. So they still have a human person whom they rely on. Then they can access priority practices and individualized guidance. And then the most important part probably is that prior to all of this, the farmers have been videotaping and continue to video different practices that they consider appropriate. And they then have a content repository that they can search and they can like and they can exchange ideas with other farmers. And so this will inform the entire process. It becomes a learning loop of what goes into the guidance and the priority and the action plan. The last component, again, is a human component, which is that we have youth ambassadors. So these are young people in the community who are extremely excited about both agroecology and digital tools and are helping to promote them. And I'm so sorry that I'm talking at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and everybody looks so sleepy. I just encourage you to, jump in your seat or something. All right. Thank you for hanging in there. All right. So moving to Vietnam. We did a similar baseline study, and here, really interestingly, you can see that the major sources of agricultural information are first and foremost extension agents. We all, put down extension, but here farmers actually are very favorable about extension information. About 25% from other farmers, and only 12% currently from digital tools. When you look at the types of digital tools that people are already using, it's mostly public media, cell phones, as you can imagine, and social media, again. And then when we asked farmers if they wanted to use, given this human contact, did they want to use digital information? 75% said yes, but only 3% of farmers and only 4% of extension agents were actually using digital tools to support any kind of agricultural information, whether technical assistance or performance assessment. So again, the opportunity here is how can we fill that gap? And in the Vietnam context, it's very different because here IRRI is working with the national government on the policy of 1 must do 5 reductions in rice, which includes agroecological principles basically of input efficiency. And they are developing a vertically integrated digital tool. It's really cool because they take information from the field level. They have farm management information at the farm level on performance assessment. And then at the national level, they're aggregating that to determine the performance of the policy. Now, that would be conventional, right? There's nothing particularly agroecological about that. But the fun part of this is that they're then taking the 5 dimensions of the policy. So the seed, the improved seed, the water efficiency, the pesticide reduction, and the fertilizer reduction, the greenhouse gas reduction. And they're allowing farmers to see how the farmers put in their performance together with the extension agents, and then they can see how they rank. So it's like a smart monitoring tool where we're hoping at different scales, local and intermediate and national, provincial and national, you could start to compare yourself to others and feel competitive in terms of improving your own scores here. This information, now here's the human component, is then fed back through discussions between the farmers and the extension agents on how to improve the performance based on what farmers would like to do and what they're already doing. So it's a kind of a twist on co-creation. It's halfway towards co-creation. I don't think it's as co-creation as the Brazil model, but I think it's a really interesting model and different approach. All right, so what does this mean for all of you? We were asked specifically to say, what do we feel is transformative? What do we feel, how has the TPP helped? And I think the transformative aspect to remember is that by, by adapting these digital tools for performance assessment and technical advisories to have more co-creation elements, which we know, we can identify those. It's a matter of building them into a digital ecosystem that works. That we can actually we can have better recognition of farmers' contexts, interests, and knowledge systems, right? Which is one of our big goals. How has TPP helped? It's helped us to reach out to many of you and to involve many of you in some of our events. And as an outreach community, it's been critical to organizing events and to sharing publications. So we thank you for that. In terms of recommendations to the TPP, the first is obviously how can we promote this co-creative aspect in our digital tools? I'm just curious in the room, how many people use some form of digital tool with the communities? Anybody? Not that many. Interesting. Okay. So there's room to expand. And then secondly is to highlight what are the features that allow this sharing of information and sharing of knowledge, not just in the tool, but in how extension agents and others work with the farmers. And then to recognize that there's a lot more work to do. So we know that these trusted human intermediaries, as the digital science people like to say, the human intermediaries, like the extension agents or community leaders, are essential. But if we want to scale up, we can't rely on the old models, right? We need to think about what's the right balance between the digital information and the human intermediary. Second is that ultimately we don't want all information. We need to curate the information. So who curates it? You know, what's the balance again of farmers versus extension agents? The business models for tool development often involve trade-offs. So Solidaridad's information that they are extracting, they do sell, you know, and farmers know that when they sign on to the tool. In Vietnam, the information goes straight up to national government, right? So there's a trade-off in terms of privacy and data control. And finally, the costs of doing this work are higher than they would be with just a digital tool, right? We're adding a component. And so we really need to understand what is the added value of co-creation. Thank you.
Great. So moving from metrics to digital tools, now we want to focus on the role of the private sector and how private sector incentives and investment influence adoption of agroecological practices. So one of the critical things that we need to think about is that agroecology in itself would not just happen at the farm level. Incentives will play a major role. So we need to picture it this way. We want to transition from the current business models, the current farming systems, into one that is more sustainable. And looking at this function, the explanatory variables that you need is that incentives, investment, metrics, business models will all play a critical role. So within this project, what we are emphasizing is that for the transition to happen, you need incentives and investments at multiple levels. So within this project, the first component is to look into incentives and investment and sustainable finance for transitioning to agroecological food systems. The second is to look into holistic metrics and digital traceability tools, and then co-design, capacity, and scale out the different agroecological practices that we identify. So for this project, we are focusing on 3 value chains: rice in Vietnam, cocoa in Peru, and wheat in Ethiopia, in 3 continents and 3 value chains. So key questions. Question number 1, what are the best fit incentives for adopting agroecological practices for different value chains? Question number 2, what are the financial benefits of adopting agroecological practices at the farm level? And finally, which sustainability metrics are companies using in order to drive sustainability at the farm level or landscape level? So what we started with was to do a quick review of all the incentives that exist. So in looking at this graph with the 3 different columns, the first column shows the different type of incentives that we have. 4 different types: market incentives, non-market incentives, regulatory incentives, and then cross-compliance. In the middle bit, you see the different types of agroecological practices. And then finally, you see the different outcomes. So we see a relation between the incentive mechanisms, how they influence adoption of agroecological practices, and the type of outcomes that we'll see. So for Vietnam, what we see is that majority of the incentives are focusing on non-market incentives. So one typical example is training. It's the same for the case of cocoa for Peru, but we see a slightly different approach or incentive mechanism for wheat value chain, where majority focuses on markets. So what lesson do we learn from this? That incentive mechanisms cannot just be one size fits all. Depending on the value chain, we need to design or look for the best fit incentives that will help farmers adopt agroecological practices. In terms of outcomes, what we see is that majority of the outcomes focuses very much on economic outcomes, so profitability, improvement in livelihood. But we see less emphasis on outcomes related to social dimension. So we need to look for specific incentives that helps to drive social inclusion, improve the way that women are empowered, or improve the way how we include marginalized groups within the different types of transitions that we are looking into. Next is to look into how different approaches or practices are adopted. What influences the decision of farmers when it comes to adopting agroecological practices? We notice that the financial profitability plays a very major role. So we looked into 4 different areas in Peru. And then for Ethiopia, we looked into 3 different practices. So certified seed, optimal or site-specific inorganic fertilizer application, and then drainage systems were the main practices that we looked in Ethiopia. And what we noticed was that for all these different practices that is part of the cluster-based approach farming in Ethiopia, they were all positive, which means that they influence the profitability decisions, influence adoption of these different agroecological practices. And it has a payback period of 1 to 2 years, which also makes it very consistent why farmers will adopt practices that has a lower payback period rather than one that is extremely long-term. So in terms of agroecology, the lesson is that we need to look into specific practices that has lower payback period and high profitability for farmers. The next is to look into the type of business models that exist. And what we noticed was that for majority of the business models that are part of the cooperatives, in the case of Peru, most of them are focusing on connectivity, knowledge co-creation, fairness, and also social values and improving participation. If we look at the lower part of the bar chart, we see soil health, economic diversification, land and natural resource, synergies, animal health, and reducing input use featuring very less. So it shows where the emphasis has been so far in terms of improving adoption of agroecological practices. And the key lesson here is to look at the middle part when we are designing inclusive business models for transitioning to agroecological food systems. The next part is to look into how different companies add sustainability metrics to their measuring portfolio. And 2 key examples is cocoa value chain and also for rice value chain. What we see in the cocoa value chain is that there is a lot of principles that are being applied compared to the rice value chain. And the key lesson here is to look into the non-cash crop or food crop, where we need more agroecological practices to be part of the business model, and especially for companies to also include level 1, level 2, and also level 3 practices within their company and measuring portfolio. So in our first year, basically what we focused on was to do these different reviews. And with the evidence, the next step is to now design the different incentive packages at the national level. So for agroecological practices in Ethiopia, Peru, and Vietnam, through a co-creation, we identified these different agroecological practices in the first column. And then we looked at the incentives and then the metrics and which outcomes will be part of transitioning to agroecological food systems. So in terms of progress, what we see as a very transformative approach for this is the fact that we identify the different types of incentive mechanisms, but also the practices with the farmers and also with national partners. And based on this, design the agroecological practices we want to promote and the different incentive mechanisms. So there are a number of challenges, as we see from the left-hand side. Based on these challenges, what we need is to have a co-creation approach, but not only a co-creation approach, we need to look into the role of incentives, both public and private sector incentives, for us to improve those incentive mechanisms and business models for farmers to transition or adopt agroecological practices. And there's a fantastic team behind this work, which I want to thank all of them, not to mention their names. And thank you all for your attention.
Thank you a lot. And now, I hope I'm not wrong again, we have the panel. Okay, we are 5 minutes behind schedule, but I mean, I am aware that you are very, very short when you want, so I will rely on your skills. And I'm going to ask you three questions and give you 1 minute to reply. Thank you. So I'm going to start with the first one. It is, what is your recipe to reconcile the local dimension of agroecological approaches and the need to deliver innovations, technology, and knowledge outputs that are sufficiently generalizable to be outscaled to different contexts? I'm going to start with Joe.
Great. I think there are a number of things to think about, and based on the research and engagement we've done so far. The first thing is to, first of all, understand what is happening at the local level. And in this case, the national level, or if it's a county level, to really understand what's happening. So in the case of agroecology, it's about the practices and the type of value chains that exist there. So having a better understanding of this is the first recipe. And that better understanding can also be enhanced through engagement with the local actors. And so having their perspective and co-designing those innovations with them would provide a second approach where the buy-in from the local actors would increase for the different innovations that we think about. And the third aspect will be to implement those innovations with the local actors, but then also have a mechanism for evaluating how those innovations are working and what needs to be changed or adapted as time goes by. And finally, for them to be able to scale out, then it means that they've sufficiently been engaged in the process, but also accepted those innovations and own them at the local level. And then that can scale out. So the three recipes are: first, engagement with the local actors; second, doing an evaluation; and third, scaling this out consistently over time.
Thank you a lot.
My answer is easy. It's co-creation with digital tools.
Great, that gives me a lot of time to talk now, doesn't it? No, I think I can be equally quick. Our solution is basically to not come up with generic solutions that don't integrate local contexts, and above all, integrate explicitly the need to contextualize locally in all generic products, so to speak. I think there is no one-size-fits-all solution, and if we continue designing one-size-fits-all solutions, we're not going to do that, linking the local with the generic global.
Thank you, Matthias. The answers are shorter than the question. So, okay, so we know the DC and the European Commission and IFAD are very keen on the usability of knowledge outputs by extensionists, decision makers, and also policy actors. So my second question here is, how are you leveraging stakeholders' engagement and participatory approaches to increase the chances of buy-in? And Jonathan already touched on this upon, but also adoption and retention of the technical assistance, as well as the performance assessment and the decision support tools by these key decision makers.
I think the key principle is engagement. And as I touched on earlier on, you need to also understand the interest and the ideas of the different partners who are involved. So in this case, you mentioned the EC, IFAD, and possibly we as partners within the project. So that engagement is key. The second thing is to have champions, policy champions. So they are the people who will be able to take up this different evidence that we generate. And if, for example, we are dealing with the African Union, then we need to have a way to connect with the policy champions within those organizations. And also, I think we need to double down advocacy as a key part to socialize the different innovations that we generate, and also have those champions to advocate on our part within the organizations or circles or networks where we are not very prominent or very visible.
Thank you, Jeremy. Yeah, so in our case, we chose partners whose interest was to have these outcomes happen in the first place. And so working with the government of Vietnam, they want the policy to be implemented. Working with the NGO Solidaridad, their very success depends on having successful outreach with the livestock farmers. So that's one element. The second element is that both parties are engaged. So in the case of Vietnam, IRRI, and then in Brazil, Solidaridad, constantly engage with policymakers and constantly engage with decision makers. So it's ongoing engagement and having the opportunity to have these dialogues where they can get feedback on, they can socialize the idea, but also get feedback on it and have the have awareness grow about what the potential is.
Thank you, Lily.
Yeah, thanks. Similar to what Joe was saying, I think engagement is crucial. Engaging with the potential adopters of what we're producing from the very beginning, giving them a sense of ownership over the entire process, giving them a decision-making power, and integrating them at every step to customize what we're producing towards their needs. And once again, not coming up with a one-size-fits-all solution, because if we want users to adopt something, they're so different. Their needs, their requests are so different. So we would have to design thousands of individual frameworks to make it useful. And I think by taking this meta approach and providing people with the tools to make the decisions themselves, and facilitating the process and guiding them through, it's much more likely that behavioral change will actually come about.
Thank you a lot, Matthias. So the last question here is, how could the TPP support upscaling transitions, knowledge outputs, methods, and decision support tools to continue driving the agroecological transition?
Sure. Read our publications. Oh, no, I'm just teasing. It's really what I said in the last slide, which is, when you have the opportunity to engage with digital tools, can you include more of these features that allow co-creation, and then also have, so really I'm looking at all the members of the TPP and saying, can you do some of this too? Can you include the features for co-creation, and can you build a digital ecosystem that is more respectful of farmers' participation in the content of that digital tool?
Yeah, thanks. As I said in the last slide as well, there's one aspect of combining different projects to get more out of it. Then there's the different domains of the TPP, and they feed into the metrics project, from the viability project, from soils research, from the CGIAR initiative. There's so much we can learn that goes beyond metric, that fits in perfectly. And at the same time, what we do in metrics helps approaches in different domains, particularly in the policy domain, for instance, but also when it comes to viability, etc. And when we make these synergies more explicit, I think it leads to automatic scaling of what we're doing. And then, of course, it is this group here that is only part of the institutional and individual members of the TPP that help in scaling. The more we engage, the more we discuss, the more we present, the more likely people are to take it up, develop it further, use it in their environments, and also bring it to other people's attention.
I would say we need more of the TPP, and looking at this great platform for us to engage and discuss, I think there is nothing like this. So we should definitely continue with what we are doing in terms of the TPP, but we also need to connect the TPP to other like-minded platforms. And in this case, I think the Agroecology Coalition could also be a unique example in order to leverage expertise from different angles, but also networks that helps us to reach broader audience.
Thank you, Jonathan. Very nice conversation. And I'm aware that we already have some questions from the online participants. Is there somebody who can read the question?
Yeah, I'll read it.
Okay.
Okay, so this is a question for metrics. How do you incorporate the different ways of knowing or different perspectives of co-creation into the metric selection framework? To my feeling, this is a key issue of selecting useful indicators which could guide transformation in line with the 13 principles. In the end, in order to use metrics as information tools, they have to be legitimized and accepted by their potential users as a sort of useful knowledge. This is from Milena Stefanova.
I'm not the only one asking difficult questions here, apparently.
Okay. Yes, thanks a lot, Milena. That's precisely what we're doing in that meta framework. We're guiding, we're not telling. So the ways of knowing, the ways of the different perspectives, they come from the users. We're just prompting thoughts. We're prompting processes. We're not telling people what to do. And I think this is a way of integrating these diverse knowledge systems and perspectives. I hope that goes in the direction. I didn't get the full question with the letter part. I'll read through it and I'll respond in written as well. Thanks, Milena.
Thanks, Matthias. Would we ask the audience if somebody has a question?
Yes, absolutely. I know that they're snoring, but we have we'd like to hear some questions from you as well.
No, the table, Michael, in case somebody's awake.
Next conference will have a nap room. Napping.
Carlo.
Yeah, thank you, and really interesting presentations. My question is about the fact that there are, so for example, in the last COP in Dubai, Region 10 was discussing around issues of outcome-based framework, whereby they are a little bit agnostic about how you get there, but as much as we, and it's more important the fact that we get there, no? So we avoid all the controversies around different terminologies. And I was wondering how or to what extent you think this is a good idea, or else how those framework actually, I mean, because I see a lot of outcomes design on those frameworks. So how does it link to that, if at all? Thank you.
That's largely to me, probably, Carlo, right? Yeah, thanks a lot. I'm in touch with the Region 10 folks on that. In principle, the short answer, I think it's a great idea. I think that we're actually working on a paper on that. Basically, these ideological turf wars are not the most helpful. I think pathways matter, but we've heard it this morning from Liang, for instance. You're talking about conservation, agriculture, and sustainable intensification. We've heard it also from you, Monica, in terms of, and we've heard it from Esther regarding organic agriculture, etc. I think to farmers and to most stakeholders, it doesn't matter so much what terminology we're using. So aligning more along what we probably hopefully all agree upon is that we need more resilient, sustainable, equitable, whatever we want to call it, food systems is good. But if we fully disregard pathways, I think we're also making a mistake. And the agroecological principles give us, I think, in my view, a fairly comprehensive overview of different pathways. There may be discussions about soil input reduction and all of these kind of things, but it does matter how we go there, basically. So I think for the agroecology community at large, it's an important discussion to have. Where do we align with other concepts? Where do we think it's different? And how do we engage in these kind of dialogues? It's not about turf wars. It's not about fighting against one another, but there's good reasons why the 13 principles of agroecology are the way they are. And for regenerative agriculture to now say, oh, we found the solution, I don't think that's the best way going forward. And there is a lot of regenerative agriculture that is highly systemic, equitable, etc. Then it's agroecology. Why use the different word? And there's also a lot of risk in regenerative agriculture of greenwashing in terms of saying, all right, actually we're doing just a little bit of sustainability improvements, but we're doing business as usual on the food system level. Then it's greenwashing. So I think it's important to engage in these discussions, but carefully, and more outcome performance-based assessment of things that is more holistic, I think, is a good way of doing so, because then you can quite clearly say, okay, you're calling this something, but actually, if you're looking at climate change, biodiversity, equity, etc., it's not performing. It's not performing at all. And this will be the case for a lot of things that are called agroecology as well. I'm 99% sure of that. But I think so. The principal answer is yes. I think it's a good idea, but it depends on the how.
If I could add, I would love to have this discussion with the whole room, actually, because I feel that as a technical person, the outcome approach, I'm completely on board. I think it resolves the competition and debate. But when you think about social movements as a core to agroecology and the value-driven approach to choosing practices and think about farmer sovereignty, that may be more important sometimes than necessarily what the outcomes are. And I'm thinking about, I live in Vermont, small farmers, many of them forgo outcomes that we might care about related to, half of the indicators on the HLPE list. So I guess the question is, how can you balance an outcome-based approach with a value-based approach?
Yeah, just a simple question. The question is, what do farmers want? That's the simple question.
And society.
And society. Farmers are part of society, right? So based on what they want, that's the outcome-based approach that they themselves also take, which might not always be optimal. And I think that's where we need to look at a different set of practices in terms of how, in terms of what really works within a specific location and how to maximize that and complement that with other practices that might not be there, but extremely important for that specific area or geographic location. So I think it's more about the best fit approach that maximizes the outcome for farmers.
If I may just come in on that point, Joe, I've noticed it also in your presentation. You focus on agroecological practices, but I think that what makes agroecology different. It's not just about the practices, and thereby it's not just about what the farmer wants, so to speak. And I think this is really important to take into account. Also, when we're talking about outcome-based frameworks, it's not just the performance of the farmers. It's a performance of an overall system. So yes, putting farmer at the center is a wonderful thing when it comes to choosing practices, but the implications of choosing these practices beyond the farm need to be taken into account. I think that is absolutely crucially important. Otherwise, we don't have to have all these discussions about food systems transformation. And we're talking about sustainable intensification, nothing else.
I fully agree.
Very good debate happening, but people are dying for coffee. And the great thing is we'll have a chance to continue the debate. But I will give the closing word to Viviane.
It's not me. I thought that Carlo just wanted to have a follow-up comment very, very briefly.
Very, very briefly, yeah, because, even when you look and going back to the Region 10, they claim that they are participatory, that they want to incorporate, and then they want to be outcome-based. But then my question is, traditional knowledge, culture, this bottom-up farmers' perception, what farmers need, as Jonathan said, it's something that is then difficult to measure or to accommodate. And so, then how is that seriously monitored? Because I really see the risk that you highlighted. And so how do we, how does the framework really capture the fact that we are serving the farmers? And that's, to me, it's a difficult question.
1 minute to reply.
I think that is good closing words, actually. I'm not sure if that needs a response. But we will certainly continue that discussion as we've started many years ago.
Okay, great debate, but we really do have to move on. And the great thing is that we have a coffee poster session now, so we can exactly continue that debate, but with a cup of coffee and with a snack maybe. So can we thank Viviane and the panelists for their great contributions.